Chapter 9. The Patchwork Quilt. In 1843, Harriet Ross began to make a patchwork quilt. She had trouble finding the brilliantly colored pieces of cotton cloth she needed. Sewing the quilt together was even harder. The needle kept slipping through her fingers. Sometimes she did not know that she had lost it until she tried to take a stitch and found that she held only a long piece of thread. Time and again, she hunted for the needle on the dirt floor of the cabin. It was difficult to find it there. Difficult for fingers accustomed to grasping the handle of a broadaxe to pick up an object as tiny as a needle. It seemed as though she would never be able to master the art of sewing, to make the needle go through the material in the places where she wanted it to go. It was the hardest task she had ever undertaken. Yet, as the quilt pattern developed, she thought it was as beautiful as the wildflowers that grew in the woods and along the edge of the roads. The yellow was like the Jerusalem flower, and the purple suggested Mother Worth, and the white pieces were like water lily, and the varying shades of green represented the leaves of all the plants and the eternal green of the pine trees. For this was no ordinary quilt. It would be trousseau, and the entire contents of what under different circumstances would have been a hope chest. Harriet had fallen in love. She was going to marry a young man named John Tubman. He was a tall, well-built fellow with a ready laugh and a clear, lilting whistle. When she worked on the quilt, head bent, awkward fingers guiding the needle carefully through the material, she experienced a strange, tender feeling that was new to her. The quilt became a symbol of life that she would share with John. She thought about him while she sewed, how tall he was, how sweet the sound of his whistling. She was so short, she had to look up to him. She looked up to him for another reason too. He was free. He had always been free. He wanted to marry her and she was a slave. So she felt humbled too. They were married in 1844. Harriet went to live in his cabin, taking with her one of her beautiful possessions, the patchwork quilt. The knowledge that she was still a slave bothered her more and more. If she were sold, she would be separated from John. She truly loved him. She had asked him how he came to be free. He said it was because his mother and father had been freed by their master at the time of the master's death. This made Harriet wonder about her own family, especially old Rit, who was forever talking about the promises of freedom that had been made to her. She paid $5 to a lawyer to look up the wills of the various masters to whom old Rit had belonged. It had taken her years to save $5. She had hoarded pennies to accumulate such a sum, but it seemed to her the information she received was well worth the cost. She found that old Rit had originally been willed to a young woman named Mary Patterson, with the provision that she was to be freed when she was 45. Mary Patterson died shortly afterwards, still unmarried. According to the lawyer, old Rit had been freed long ago. Instead, she remained a slave. And so, of course, her children were slaves. Old Rit had been sold and resold many times. After this, Harriet grew more and more discontented. She felt that she was a slave only because old Rit had been tricked and deceived years ago. Times were hard the year that Harriet married John Tubman, and the next year too. In the quarter, she heard a great deal of talk about the reasons for this. One of the house servants said the trouble was due to the difference in price of cotton. Dr. Thompson had said so. He said cotton brought 13 cents a pound in 1837, and when it was high, the slave traders paid as much as $1,000 for prime field hands. Then, cotton started going down until now, in 1845, it was bringing only 5 cents a pound, and the slave traders gave less than $500 for young, strong slaves. Harriet decided that from the dilapidated look of the plantation, fields laying fallow, the big house in need of repair, Doc Thompson would soon be selling slaves again. He wouldn't be able to get much for them in Maryland, so in spite of the old master's will, he would sell them south. She told John Tubman this. Every time she said it, she spoke of going north, of running away, following the North Star. He warned her against such foolishness. What would she find there that she didn't have here? She hired her time, and so she always had a little money of her own. They had a cabin to themselves. Maryland was a good place to live. It never got cold. There were all the coves and creeks where one could fish and set traps. He said that if she went north, she'd freeze to death. Besides, what happened to the ones who went there? None of them came back to tell what it was like. Why was that? Because they couldn't. They died there. They must have. If they were still alive, they would have returned to show the way to some of the rest of the slaves. None returned. None sent back word. What would she have there that she didn't have here? Her reply was always the same. I'd be free. She told him about the dreams she had, how night after night she dreamed that men on horseback came riding into the quarter, and she heard the shrieks and screams of women and children as they were put into the chain gang, and the screaming of the women made her wake up. She would lie there in the dark of the cabin, sweating, feeling cold because the fire was out, and the chill from the dirt floor seemed to have reached her very bones. And though awake, she could still hear the echo of screams. When she went back to sleep, she would dream again. This time she was flying. She flew over cotton fields and cornfields, and corn was ripe, the tassels waving all golden brown in the wind. And then she flew over Cambridge and the Choptank River, and she could see the gleam of the water like a mirror far down under her. And then she came to a mountain and flew over that. At last, she reached a barrier. Sometimes it was a fence, sometimes a river, and she couldn't fly over it, she said. It appeared like I wouldn't have the strength. And just as I was sinking down, there would be ladies all dressed in white over there, and they would put out their arms and pull me across. John Tubman disliked these dreams. When she retold them, her husky voice pitched low. She made them sound as though they had really happened. He thought this showed how restless and impatient she had become. He laughed at her finally. He said that she must be related to old Kojo, who was so slow-witted. He never laughed at a funny story until a half hour after it was told, because only a slow-witted person would have the same dream all the time. In spite of his derision, she kept telling him about her dreams. She said that on clear nights, the North Star seemed to beckon to her. She was sure she could follow that star. They could go north together. Then she would be free too. Nothing could part them then. He decided he would put an end to this talk of escape, of the North and freedom. He asked what she would do when the sky was dark. Then how would she know which way was north? She couldn't read the signs along the road. She wouldn't know which way to go. He would not go with her. He was perfectly satisfied where he was. She would be alone, in the dark, in the silence of the deep woods. What would she eat? Where would she get food? She started to say, in the woods, she could live a long time on the edible berries and fruit that she had long ago learned to recognize. And yet, she had seen many a half-starved runaway brought back in chains, not enough flesh left on him to provide a decent meal for a buzzard. Perhaps she too would starve. She remembered the time she ran away from Miss Susan's and crawled into a pig pen. Remembered the squealing and grunting of the pigs, the slops thrown into the trough, and fighting with the pigs, pushing them away to get at the trough. After 4 days, she had been indistinguishable from the pigs, filthy, foul-smelling, and starving. So she had gone back to Miss Susan. The memory of that experience made her avoid John's eyes, not answer him. Perhaps her silence made him angry. He may have interpreted it as evidence of her stubbornness, or willfulness, or utter disregard for all his warnings, and so made a threat which would put a stop to this crazy talk about freedom. He shouted at her, "You take off, and I'll tell the master. I'll tell the master right quick." She stared at him, shocked, thinking he couldn't. He wouldn't. If he told the master that she was missing, she would be caught before she got off the plantation. John knew what happened to runaways who were caught and brought back. Surely he would not betray his own wife. And yet, she knew that there were slaves who had betrayed other slaves when they tried to escape. Sometimes they told because they were afraid of the master. It was always hard on the ones who were left behind. Sometimes the house servants were the betrayers. They were closest to the masters, known to be tattletales, certain to be rewarded because of their tale-bearing. But John Tubman was free, and free Negroes helped the runaways. It was one of the reasons the master disliked and distrusted them. Surely John would not deny freedom to her when he had it himself. Perhaps he was afraid he would be held responsible for her escape. Afraid the master would think John had incited her to run away. Besides, he was satisfied here. He had said so, and men disliked change, or so old Rit had told her, saying all the women thrived on it. Then she thought, frowning, but if a man really loved a woman, wouldn't he be willing to take risk to help her to safety? She shook her head. He must have been joking, or speaking through a sudden uncontrollable anger. "You don't mean that," she said slowly, but he did mean it. She could tell by the way he looked at her. For the tall young man with the gay laugh and the merry whistle had been replaced by a hostile stranger who stared at her as he said, "You just start and see." She knew that no matter what words she might hear during the rest of her life, she would never again hear anything said that hurt like this. It was as though he had deliberately tried to kill all the trust and the love and the deep devotion she had for him. That night, as she lay beside him on the floor of the cabin, she felt that he was watching her, waiting to see if it was the night when she would try to leave. From that night on, she was afraid of him. In the spring of the same year, Thomas Garrett Quaker, who since 1822 had been offering food and shelter to runaway slaves in Wellington, Delaware, was tried and found guilty of breaking the law covering fugitive slaves. Found guilty with him was John Hunn, a station master of the Underground Railroad in Middletown, Delaware, and a much younger man. The trial was held in May term of the United States Court at Newcastle before Chief Justice Taney and Judge All. The fines and damages that Garrett had to pay took every dollar of his property. His household effects and all his belongings were sold at public auction. The sheriff who conducted the sale turned to Garrett and said, "Thomas, I hope you'll never be caught at this again." Garrett, who was then 60 years old, answered, "Friend, I haven't a dollar in the world, but if thee knows a fugitive anywhere on the face of the earth who needs a breakfast, send him to me." During the operation of the Underground Railroad, 2,500 slaves passed through Garrett Station in Wellington.